He built his fortune brick by brick, but nothing prepared him for the day he found a little homeless girl hiding in his mansion. Her trembling voice shattered the silence and uncovered a truth he never dared to face. Sometimes, the smallest voice can heal the deepest wounds. And before we begin, let me wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story tonight? The storm had rolled in from the Pacific before dusk, shaking the windows of the Hale estate that clung to the cliffs above Monterey Bay. Inside, the house felt too large for one man. Every sound rained on glass. The tick of the brass clock seemed to echo back at him. Elias Hale sat at his desk surrounded by papers and the low hum of a computer that had long since gone to sleep. He wasn't working anymore, only pretending to. Work was what he did when he didn't want to feel anything. Agnes Cooper, his housekeeper of 20 years, padded in quietly with a cup of chamomile tea. "Mr. Hale, you should call it a night," she said, her voice soft but firm. He nodded without looking up. Outside, lightning drew a brief white scar across the sea. Then came the knock, a small, hesitant tapping that barely rose above the wind. Elias frowned. It came again, 3 short knocks, a pause, then one more. Agnes turned toward the door. Who in the world would be out on a night like this? When she opened it, the wind rushed in with the smell of wet pine and salt. Standing on the threshold was a child no taller than her waist, her hair plastered to her cheeks, a stuffed bear pressed to her chest. Her lips were trembling, but her voice was clear. "Please, sir," she said, looking up at Elias. "My mom said if I ever get lost, I should find you." He blinked, unsure he had heard correctly. "Find me?" His tone was more confusion than anger. "Yes," the girl said. "She told me you'd keep me safe. She said, you're my dad." The room seemed to shrink. For a moment, Elias forgot the rain, forgot the tea cooling on the table. Agnes gasped softly and knelt to wrap the child in a towel. The little one clung to the bear, its button eye missing. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Agnes asked. "Hazel," she whispered. Her voice carried the faint lilt of someone raised by tenderness. "Hazel Ellis." Elias froze. The name struck him like a bell half remembered. Ellis, why did it feel familiar? He turned away, searching the walls as if the answer might be hidden in one of his framed awards or the cityscape photographs that said nothing about him as a man. Agnes ushered the child toward the fireplace. "I'll warm her up. Mr. Hale, maybe call the police?" Elias nodded mechanically, but his hand didn't move toward the phone. He studied Hazel instead. There was something in her face, a tilt of the chin, a steadiness in the eyes that tugged at a place he didn't know still existed. When the storm groaned louder, Hazel flinched. Agnes handed her a mug of cocoa. "You're safe now, honey," she murmured. But Hazel's gaze drifted past the firelight to the mantel where an old photograph stood. A younger Elias with a woman beside him, both smiling in front of the Monterey Pier. Hazel pointed. "My mom said you have kind eyes," she said softly, "just like in that picture." Elias felt his throat tighten. He hadn't looked at that photo in years. He couldn't even recall the woman's name. The edges of the memory had been blurred by an accident, by time, by a life lived too fast. Now a child stood before him, claiming to be part of that forgotten world. Agnes caught the look on his face, half terror, half disbelief. "Sir," she said quietly, "maybe you should sit down." But he didn't. He just stared at Hazel, the fire flickering between them. And for the first time in many winters, Elias Hale felt something thaw. Agnes spread a blanket over Hazel's shoulders and placed her near the hearth. The child's shoes left tiny wet prints on the hardwood floor. She looked around, wide-eyed, as if the house itself might whisper secrets. "Your home is really big," she said. Elias tried to smile, but it came out thin. "It's just a place to stay dry." He poured himself a glass of water, only to realize his hands were shaking. "Hazel, where is your mother now?" The girl hesitated, eyes fixed on the fire. "She got sick. She said she was too tired to wake up this morning. She told me to be brave and to find you." Agnes covered her mouth, whispering, "Dear Lord." Elias set the glass down, staring into the orange glow. His voice fell to a whisper. "What was her name again?" "Marion," Hazel said. "Marion Ellis." The name opened a door in his memory. A flash of laughter near the pier, the smell of cinnamon coffee, the sound of gulls. He felt dizzy, as if a wave had broken somewhere inside him. Agnes touched his sleeve. Mr. Hale, we can't just leave her here not knowing. Let's call someone. He nodded, but still no call was made. Instead, he crouched beside the girl. Hazel, how old are you? 5. Do you know where you came from? Mom and me live by the sea. There were lots of shells, and a blue bike I wasn't allowed to ride in the rain. Her answers were simple, pure, but each one felt like another stone laid on his chest. He wanted to ask 100 questions, yet could barely speak one. When the wind rattled the shutters again, Hazel reached out her hand. Are you mad at me? Elias blinked. Why would I be mad? Because I came without asking. He almost laughed, a dry, broken sound. No, sweetheart. You just surprised me. Agnes cleared her throat. I'll fix a bed for her in the guest room. She shouldn't be alone tonight. Elias nodded. Thank you, Agnes. Hazel followed her down the hallway, tiny feet padding on the floor. Before turning the corner, she looked back and said, Good night, Mr. Hale. The words settled in the room like a prayer. When the house grew quiet again, Elias poured another drink, but the taste of whiskey offered no warmth. He stood by the window watching the storm claw at the sea, somewhere in the distance. Church bells rang faintly, a reminder that morning would come whether he wanted it or not. He glanced toward the hallway where Hazel had disappeared. The photograph on the mantel caught the light again. The woman beside his younger self seemed to smile through the years. Marian Ellis. The name echoed, stirring the shadows of a life he thought he'd left behind. Outside, the wind softened. Inside, a small heartbeat of warmth lingered, fragile but real. Elias closed his eyes, unsure if it was fear or hope he was feeling, only knowing that nothing in his life would remain the same after this night. The thunder rolled again, and somewhere deep inside, something began to break open. Who are you, really? He whispered to the dark, but the only answer was the steady rhythm of the rain. The following morning came dressed in a thin mist that softened every sound along the Carmel coastline. Elias stood by the tall windows of his study, a mug of coffee cooling in his hand, watching the ocean push and pull against the rocks. The world outside looked calm, but inside, he felt a faint unease, the kind that comes when something in life shifts, just enough to remind you that peace is never permanent. Hazel's laughter echoed from the hallway. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a box of colored pencils scattered around her, sketching a house, not the one they lived in now, but another, older one. This is where Mommy used to make pancakes, she said, showing him the drawing. Elias blinked. You mean Marian? Hazel nodded seriously. Yes, it was by the sea. There were white curtains and a dog that barked a lot. You were there too. The words hit him with a strange, quiet force. He couldn't remember such a house. But Hazel described it with the clarity of someone recalling a dream they truly believed. He knelt beside her, studying the picture. The lines were childish, but certain: the cliffs, the porch, the view of the waves. Something about it tugged at him. That's beautiful, he said softly. Where did you see this place? In my heart, she said. Mom told me once that sometimes our hearts remember things our minds forget. He froze. The phrasing, it was something Marian used to say, long before their lives had unraveled. Our hearts remember what our minds can't. He hadn't heard those words in over a decade. At breakfast, Agnes noticed his silence. You look like a man trying to solve a riddle. Maybe I am, Elias said, stirring his coffee absently. Hazel drew something this morning, a place I thought I'd never seen, but it felt familiar. Agnes smiled gently. Children see truth in colors, not logic. Maybe she's showing you something you forgot to notice. He wanted to dismiss it, but the image stayed with him all morning. The cliffs, the porch, the sea. When he opened his laptop later that day, he typed, almost without thinking, Carmel by the sea, old coastal cottages for sale 15 years ago. Photographs appeared, grainy and faded, but one of them stopped him cold. A white-painted house with blue shutters, wildflowers climbing the fence, a swing by the window exactly as Hazel had drawn. He leaned closer, scrolling through the listing. The owner's name blinked in the corner of the screen, Marian Ellis. For a long while, he just stared, the name shimmering on the glass like something half-real. Then he closed the laptop, pressing his palms to his eyes. It couldn't be coincidence. But if it wasn't, what did that mean about Hazel? About the years he couldn't clearly remember after the accident? He looked toward the doorway where Hazel stood, holding her bear, watching him with eyes, too, knowing for her age. "Daddy," she asked softly, "why are you sad when I draw happy things?" He forced a smile. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking." "About Mommy?" The word landed like a whisper from the past. He nodded slowly. "Yes, about Mommy." Hazel climbed onto his lap, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Don't worry," she said, her voice muffled. "She said one day we'll all be together again." Elias froze, every breath caught in his throat.
"She said that?"
Hazel nodded, eyes bright with belief. "She says it when I dream." The clock ticked loud in the silence that followed. Outside, the sea rolled endlessly patient, unchanging as if waiting for him to remember what it already knew. That afternoon, the ocean mist lifted, leaving behind the faint scent of rain and salt. Elias paced the length of his study, the photograph of Marion's old cottage still glowing faintly on the laptop screen. He could feel the edges of his memory pressing inward like fog, beginning to clear, revealing the outline of something he wasn't yet ready to face. He picked up the phone and called the one man who might have answers. "Avery Clark," he said when the line connected. A familiar, steady voice responded. "Elias, it's been a while. What's going on?" "I need you to look into someone. Marion Ellis. She used to work for me. I think she might have been part of my life before the accident." There was a pause. "You're digging into old ghosts," Avery said. "You sure you want to wake them?" Elias's tone was calm but firm. "I don't think they ever really slept." A few hours later, Avery called back. "Found her name in the company records. She resigned 6 years ago, right before your crash. No criminal record, no forwarding address, but she filed an insurance claim that same week. Car accident, Highway 1. Sound familiar?" Elias's chest tightened. "I don't remember the accident. Only fragments. Rain. Headlights. A scream." "The report says the passenger disappeared from the scene before paramedics arrived," Avery continued. "No name was given, but the description fits her." Elias pressed a hand to his forehead. "So she survived." "Looks that way," Avery said. "If I were you, I'd start with that cottage in Carmel. It's still listed under her name." After he hung up, Elias stood at the window, staring out toward the sea. The tide had begun to rise, dragging the light across the water in slow, heavy motions. He could almost hear Marion's laughter in the wind, that low, easy sound that used to fill the space's silence couldn't. Agnes appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. "You've been quiet all day," she said softly. "I found something," he said. "Or maybe someone." She tilted her head. "The past?" He nodded. "It feels close, Agnes. Like it's been waiting for me to turn around." She stepped closer, resting a hand on his arm. "Sometimes the only way forward is back through the things we tried to forget." "Oh." He wanted to tell her about the photo, the name, the growing certainty in his chest. But before he could speak, Hazel appeared holding a crumpled sheet of paper. "Look," she said. "It's a letter." Elias took it gently. In uneven handwriting, Hazel had copied something her mother once told her. "When people get lost, the ocean remembers the way home." His throat tightened. "Where did you learn that?" "Mom used to say it when the waves were loud," Hazel answered, looking out the window. "She said they were talking to you." Elias folded the paper carefully. "Maybe they still are." That night, after Hazel had fallen asleep, he sat at his desk with a glass of scotch untouched beside him. The room was quiet, except for the low hum of the sea beyond the cliffs. He opened his laptop again and stared at Marion's picture, the same smile, the same house, the same horizon. He whispered her name, testing the sound of it on his tongue, as if saying it aloud might unlock the part of his memory that had stayed hidden too long. "Marion." The word lingered in the air like a promise. A knock broke the silence. Agnes peeked in, her voice low. "Mr. Hale, it's late. You should rest." He turned, weary but awake, in a way he hadn't been in years. "I will. Tomorrow, I'm going to Carmel." She nodded. "Then you'll need your strength. Finding the truth can be heavier than losing it." When she left, Elias looked once more at the photograph. The sea behind Marion seemed to shimmer, the same sea that now stretched beneath his window. He whispered to the empty room, "If she's mine, then where's her mother?" Outside, the wind carried the scent of salt and rain through the open window, and far off, the tide answered steady, patient, eternal. In the hush between the waves, a life half-remembered began to call him home. The morning fog along Highway 1 hung low and silver, blurring the cliffs into shapes that looked half-real. Elias drove slowly, every curve of the road tugging at a memory he couldn't fully name. The closer he came to Carmel, the stronger the pull became, as though the coastline itself was whispering, "You've been here before." He stopped once, stepping out at a turnout that overlooked the sea. Below, the waves smashed white against the rocks, steady and eternal. The same rhythm had once filled his dreams. Now it was the sound of something calling him home. By noon he reached the small cottage he'd seen on the screen. The paint had faded to a softer white, and ivy curled over the porch rails. A "for lease" sign tilted in the wind. His pulse quickened. He climbed the steps and ran his hand over the doorframe, tracing the grooves where time had bitten into the wood. The door creaked open with a push. Inside, dust floated in the light like ghosts suspended in air. The room smelled faintly of cedar and something sweeter, lavender, maybe, or bread once baked in love. On the mantel lay a single photograph, warped by years of Sunday. Elias lifted it carefully. Marion stood on the beach with a small child in her arms, both of them laughing. He stared at the photo until the edges trembled in his hands. The child's face was Hazel's. His knees nearly gave out. He sat on the old couch, the photograph trembling against his palm. The world tilted. The sound of the ocean roared in his ears. He pressed his eyes shut, and for a flash, memory cracked open, rain hammering the windshield. Marion's voice shouting his name, the sharp curve of light before impact. "Mr. Hale?" The voice startled him. Avery Clark stood in the doorway, holding a folder. "You weren't easy to find," Avery said, stepping inside. "I thought you might need company for this part." Ilias managed a rough laugh. "You always did show up where the trouble was. Habit of a good lawyer." Avery handed him the folder. "These are the reports you asked for, medical, legal, everything that never made sense after your crash." Elias opened it slowly. Pages of statements, receipts, photographs. One document stood out, a birth certificate, edges yellowed with time. Hazel Ellis Hale. His breath hitched. "She used both our names." Avery nodded. "She filed it the week after you disappeared from the hospital. Guess she thought she'd lost you." The truth settled heavy and bright all at once. Hazel wasn't just a stranger's child who'd wandered into his life. She was his daughter. The missing years had been hiding the very thing that could have saved him. Elias rose, pacing the room. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "My father," he knew. Avery's silence was answer enough. Elias gripped the edge of the table. He buried the truth to protect the company, to protect his name. "Maybe," Avery said gently. "But now you know. What you do with it, that's the real test." Elias looked around the house again, the curtain ring still hanging, the faint outline where a family photo once rested on the wall. He could almost hear Marion's laugh echoing off the beams, soft and sure. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the porch chimes. Elias whispered to the empty room, "I'll make it right." Emmer won. Avery folded his arms. "Then start with her." "Marion?" "No," Avery said, nodding toward the photo of the little girl. "Start with Hazel. She already found you once. Don't make her look again." Elias picked up the photograph and slid it into his coat pocket. The weight of it felt like a promise. When they left, the door swung shut behind them, stirring the dust back into the air, tiny fragments of memory rising in the late afternoon Sunday. By the time Elias reached Monterey again, the sun had already begun to set a thin, coppery line bleeding across the horizon. The drive back was silent, except for the steady hum of the engine and the soft crackle of old memories clawing their way through the fog of his mind. He had held the photograph the entire way, the paper growing warm in his hand. When he walked into the house, Agnes was setting the dinner table. Hazel sat nearby, coloring with quiet focus. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Daddy, you're back!" Her voice, bright and innocent, pierced him straight through. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. He knelt down beside her instead, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I missed you," he said softly. Hazel beamed. "I missed you too." He glanced at her, drawing another picture of the white cottage by the sea. This time, there were 3 figures standing on the porch: a man, a woman, and a child. His heart stuttered. Agnes watched him quietly. "You found something, didn't you?" Elias nodded. "I found everything I'd forgotten, and everything I shouldn't have." Later that night, after Hazel had gone to bed, he sat alone in the study. The documents Avery had given him were spread across the desk, a map of choices made and truths buried. His father's name appeared in almost every report, signed in neat, decisive strokes. Richard Hale had paid for the hospital transfer, the closed case file, the sealed birth record. The pieces fell together like shards of glass. Elias realized that the man who'd taught him to measure life in profits and perfection had also stolen from him the one thing that mattered: a chance to be a father. The phone rang. He answered without thinking. Elias. The voice on the other end was old, familiar, and cold. "Father, I assume you've been to the cottage," Richard said. "I was hoping you'd stay away." "Why?" Elias asked, his voice low. "Because I'd find out what you did." "You were in no state to raise a child," Richard replied. "You could barely remember your own name after the accident. Marion was unstable. I did what was necessary." "What was necessary?" Elias repeated, his tone shaking. "Was to tell the truth." Silence. "Then I protected you from weakness." Elias looked around the room, the heavy furniture, the cold portraits, the hollow trophies of a life built on silence. "No," he said quietly. "You protected yourself from love." The line went dead. He sat there for a long time, the hum of the ocean seeping through the window, steady as breath. Somewhere upstairs, Hazel stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly. The sound steadied him. He went to her room and stood by the doorway. The moonlight spilled across her small face, her hand curled around the corner of her blanket. She looked so much like Marion that his chest ached. He whispered, "You're my reason now, Hazel. You and your mother." Hazel shifted slightly, mumbling something half-dreamed. "Mommy said the ocean remembers." Elias smiled through his tears. "It does, sweetheart, and tomorrow we'll find her." He walked out onto the porch, the night air cool against his face. The photograph of Marion and Hazel rested in his pocket. He took it out and held it under the starlight. From the cliffs below came the deep, rhythmic sound of the sea. It wasn't angry or mournful anymore. It was patient, eternal, forgiving. A faint light flickered from his father's mansion down the coast, but Elias turned away. He was done living in the shadow of men who feared emotion. He would build something new, a life measured not by control, but by care. When he went back inside, Agnes was waiting by the stairs. "You've made up your mind," she said. "Yes," he replied. "I'm going to find Marion, and when I do, I'm not leaving without her." Agnes smiled sadly. "Then I suppose it's time to pack a bag." As he looked once more toward the sea, Elias felt something inside him shift, the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. He wasn't running from the past anymore. He was walking toward it, ready to meet it head-on. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of lavender. From the cliffs, Marion's scent. It wrapped around him like a memory reborn. And as the tide rose under the moonlight, the man who once measured love by loss began to understand. The true test of a heart is not how much it can endure, but how much it dares to remember. The highway unfurled before him like a ribbon of gray silk, winding through the cypress-covered cliffs of the California coast. The morning fog still clung to the edges of the sea, turning the horizon into a watercolor of silver and blue. Elias Hale drove with his window half open, the scent of salt and pine mixing in the air. He had not been down this road in years, and yet everything felt strangely familiar, like a melody he once knew, but had forgotten how to hum. In the back seat, Hazel sang softly to herself, clutching the same stuffed bear that had followed her since that rainy night. Beside her, Agnes Cooper sipped tea from a thermos and kept her eyes on the view. She could sense the tension radiating from the driver's seat. "You sure you want to do this alone, Mr. Hale?" she asked gently. Elias didn't look away from the road. "No," he admitted. "But I can't not do it." They passed the wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Carmel by the Sea." The letters looked smaller than he remembered. The town itself was quiet that morning, sleepy streets lined with art galleries, ivy-covered cottages, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting from open doors. Everything here seemed to belong to another time, slower and softer. Hazel pressed her face to the glass. "It's pretty here," she said. "Like the pictures Mom used to paint." Elias's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "She painted?" "Oh, yes," Hazel said, smiling. "She always said colors could tell secrets better than words." Her sentence landed like a stone in his chest. Marian Ellis. The name had begun to live inside him again these past days, stirring old feelings that memory alone couldn't bury. Now, the sea that once separated them had guided him back. They parked on Ocean Avenue, just a short walk from a small cafe tucked beneath flowering vines. The sign above the door read Salt and Honey, painted in faded gold script. Hazel gasped and pointed. "That's Mom's handwriting!" She drew that heart under the name. Elias stared at the lettering, his breath catching. He remembered the way she used to doodle on napkins during meetings, little hearts and swirls she thought no one noticed. "She always loved that color of gold," he murmured. When they stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed softly. The air was warm with the scent of cinnamon, vanilla, and something sweet baking in the oven. Conversations murmured around them, locals sharing stories, an old jazz tune playing faintly from a radio on the shelf. Behind the counter stood a woman arranging pastries on a tray. Her hair, once dark, now carried threads of copper that glowed in the morning light. She turned, and the world seemed to still. "Elias," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a recognition, a truth finally spoken aloud after 6 long years. He froze, unsure whether to move closer or flee. Her voice had not changed. It was the same calm tone that once steadied him during long nights of work. The same voice that had whispered, "Be careful," the night everything fell apart. "You're alive," he finally said, barely a whisper. Marian Ellis's lips parted in a faint, trembling smile. "So are you," she said. "Though I wondered, for a long time, if you ever really wanted to be." Hazel ran to her and wrapped her arms around her waist. "Mom, I told you I found him. I told you the sea would help me." Marian's eyes glistened as she bent to hold her daughter. "Yes, sweetheart, you did." Then she looked back at Elias. "Why now?" He took a breath, his throat tight. "Because I remembered. Or maybe, because I finally wanted to." For a moment, silence filled the space between them, thick as fog. Only the soft hiss of the espresso machine broke it. Marian guided Hazel toward a small table near the window. "Go sit there for a minute, honey. Mommy needs to talk." When the girl skipped away, Marian turned back to Elias. "I thought you'd never come." "I didn't know you were alive," he said. "My father told me you didn't make it, that the crash took you." Her expression hardened. "Your father made sure you believed that. He came to the hospital the next morning, said you didn't want me or the baby, said you wanted to erase everything." Elias shook his head. "That's not true." "It doesn't matter now," she said quietly. "I left. I had to protect Hazel." He stared at her, at the faint scar along her temple, at the lines that time had written gently across her face. "I lost 5 years because of that lie. 5 years I could have known my daughter." Marian looked down at her flour-dusted hands. "You can't rewrite what's already been lived, Elias." "I'm not trying to rewrite it," he said softly. "I'm trying to understand it." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the waves rolled lazily against the shore. Through the cafe window, sunlight filtered through lace curtains, falling in soft patterns across the floor. It felt like standing inside a memory that refused to fade. Then Marian sighed. "Do you still forget things?" she asked. "Not the way I used to," he said. "The doctors said the memories would come back slowly, but some never did. Some were stolen." Her gaze softened. "Maybe they weren't stolen," she said. "Maybe they were waiting for the right reason to return." He almost smiled. "And that reason is Hazel?" "Maybe," she said, glancing toward the table where their daughter now drew pictures of boats and stars. "Or maybe it's love itself." He followed her eyes and saw the little girl smiling, completely at peace. Something fragile shifted in him, a quiet sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. Marian wiped her hands on her apron and took a deep breath. "You should know something," she said. "After the accident, I tried to reach you. I called, I wrote letters, but your father answered every time. He told me you were engaged to someone else, that you'd moved on. Elias closed his eyes. He lied to protect his empire. Not me. He lied to protect himself, she said bitterly. He couldn't bear the thought of his perfect son being tied to a girl who came from nowhere. Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. She had cried enough over the years. I'm not that man anymore, Elias said quietly. If you let me, I want to know her, both of you. Marion looked at him for a long time. I believe you, she said finally. But belief isn't forgiveness. It's only the beginning. Elias nodded. Then let's begin. At the window, Hazel lifted her drawing 3 figures holding hands under a golden sun and waved it proudly. Marion smiled despite herself. She always draws families, she whispered. Elias's eyes glistened. Then maybe she remembers what I forgot. Outside, a soft wind stirred the chimes above the cafe door, and somewhere beyond the hills, church bells began to ring slow, steady, full of grace. It sounded like something ending and something new beginning all at once. For the first time in years, Elias Hale allowed himself to breathe fully. The air smelled of cinnamon and sea salt, and he thought, maybe this is what forgiveness feels like. Quiet, ordinary, but real. In the distance, waves kept breaking, one after another, steady as the heartbeat of the past returning home. The drive back to Monterey was quieter than Elias expected. The sea stretched endlessly beside the road, calm now, though something restless stirred inside him. The meeting with Marion had left him raw, not broken, but exposed, as if the walls he'd built around his past had finally cracked. Agnes sat in the passenger seat, hands folded neatly in her lap. She had known him long enough to recognize when silence meant thought, not peace. You're going to see your father, aren't you? She asked at last. Elias nodded. I need to. She sighed, eyes still on the road. That man doesn't like ghosts coming back to dinner. I'm not going for dinner. Hazel slept in the back seat, her head resting against her bear, the rhythm of the car lulling her into dreams. Elias glanced at her through the mirror, that small, steady reminder of everything he'd lost and everything he still had a chance to make right. The Hale estate stood on the northern edge of town, an old mansion overlooking the same cliffs as Elias's own home. When they arrived, the sun was beginning to set, spilling gold across the ocean. The house hadn't changed, tall, cold, immaculate, like its owner. Richard Hale was in the study, exactly where Elias knew he would be. Seated behind a mahogany desk, a glass of scotch in one hand, the evening news murmuring from the corner. When he looked up, his eyes were as sharp as ever. Elias, he said flatly, to what do I owe this surprise? Elias didn't sit. You lied to me. His father raised a brow, unbothered. You'll have to be more specific. I lie about many things. It's part of surviving in this world. About Marion Ellis, Elias said. You told me she died. Richard set his glass down with a soft clink. I did what was necessary. That woman was a distraction and a liability. You were building a company that couldn't afford scandals. Elias's jaw tightened. She was pregnant. His father didn't blink. Which was precisely the scandal I prevented. The air in the room thickened. The old clock on the mantel ticked once, twice, before Elias found his voice again. You erased a life. You erased my life. Oh? Richard leaned back in his chair. I protected you. You were a mess after that accident, broken. Weak. You needed to start over. I needed the truth. Truth? The old man laughed bitterly. Truth doesn't build empires, son. Discipline does. Control does. You think this company, this family name would survive if you'd been seen raising a waitress's child? Elias stared at him, realizing that somewhere along the way, his father had turned everything love, loss, even memory into transactions. That waitress, Elias said quietly, gave me something you never could. Richard's smile faded. And what's that? Elias looked toward the window where the last light of the sunset glowed over the water. A reason to be human. Oh. His father's face hardened, but he said nothing. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. After a long moment, Elias turned toward the door. I'm taking Hazel home. You'll never use my past against me again. Richard called after him, voice suddenly sharp. You think you can just walk away from this family? From everything I built? Elias didn't turn around. "I'm not walking away. I'm finally walking towards something worth keeping. He left the room before his father could reply, the echo of his footsteps swallowed by the marble hall. Outside, the first stars had appeared, faint against the fading sky. Agnes waited by the car, eyes searching his face. "Well?" he exhaled slowly. "He's still the man I remember." "Then you've done what you came for," she said softly. "You've looked at the ghost and seen it for what it is." Elias nodded. "Now I just have to live with it." The car door creaked as he opened it. Hazel stirred in the back seat, half awake. The word daddy caught him off guard. It wasn't something she'd ever said before. He looked at her small, innocent, already part of a world that had been denied to him for so long. "Yes," he whispered. "We're going home." The road stretched ahead under a sky full of quiet stars, and for the first time in years, Elias Hale felt like he knew where he was going. That night, the house was quiet, but Elias couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the ocean pulse under the moonlight. Every wave looked like a heartbeat he could almost hear. The confrontation with his father had left him hollowed out, but somewhere inside that emptiness, something was beginning to grow a slow, painful kind of clarity. Agnes found him there just before midnight, a blanket draped over her arm. "You should rest," she said softly. "I can't," he replied. "If I close my eyes, I see everything. The accident, the years I lost, the people I failed." Agnes set the blanket over his shoulders and didn't speak for a while. She had learned long ago that silence could sometimes heal more than words. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out an old envelope, its edges worn and yellowed. "I found this in one of the boxes your father stored in the attic," she said. "It's addressed to you." He stared at the handwriting on the front. The ink had faded, but the name was clear. Elias. He opened it slowly. The letter inside was short, written in a hand he hadn't seen in years, Marion's. "Elias, if you ever read this, it means something went wrong. I don't know if you'll remember me, or the nights by the pier, or how you said the sea would never let us drift apart. But if you've forgotten, I forgive you. Memory isn't love. It's just proof that love once existed, and ours did. If you ever find the courage to come back, look for the light by the old cafe. I'll keep it burning. M." The paper trembled in his hands. He could almost hear her voice again, soft and sure, cutting through the years like sunlight through fog. "She was waiting for me," he whispered. "All this time." Agnes nodded. She never stopped. He looked down at the letter again. "My father took this from me. Some people fear love because it makes them powerless," Agnes said. "Your father built a world where control was everything. But you're not him." Elias folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. "No," he said. "I'm not." He walked down to the shoreline before dawn, the sand cold beneath his feet, the horizon still dark. The sea smelled of salt and promise. He thought of Marion in her cafe, of Hazel sleeping upstairs, of the life that could still be reclaimed if he had the courage to reach for it. The memory of the accident came back, then fragmented but sharp. The crash, the screech of tires, Marion's cry, the taste of blood and the smell of gasoline. He had tried to move, but his father's voice had cut through the chaos. "Forget it ever happened, Elias. It's over. Start over." He had obeyed, too broken to question. And in doing so, he had buried the only parts of himself that were real. Now, as the first light touched the horizon, he made a quiet promise to the sea. "No more forgetting," he whispered. "No more lies." When he turned back toward the house, Hazel was standing at the edge of the path in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy," she said softly, "I saw the light, the one by the water." He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What light, sweetheart?" She pointed toward the distant cliffs, where the faint glow of a lantern flickered against the morning mist coming from the direction of Carmel. "Mom's waiting," Hazel said. Elias felt a tear slip free before he could stop it. He lifted her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. "Then we won't make her wait any longer." Agnes watched from the porch, her hands clasped together, eyes glistening with a quiet, motherly pride. As the sun broke over the horizon, Elias turned toward the road again. The light from Carmel shimmered faintly in the distance, like a beacon calling him home. He whispered almost to himself, "This time, I'm ready to remember everything." The sea answered with a long, gentle roar as if giving him its blessing. And somewhere between the cliffs and the dawn, the shadows of the past began to fade, leaving only the fragile outline of a man who had finally found the courage to return to the light. By the first week of December, Carmel was wrapped in a soft kind of winter, the kind that never quite froze the air, but made the world smell faintly of pine and ocean. Every storefront had lights draped across its eaves, and the town square shimmered with garlands. The Winter Lights Festival would begin that night, and people from every corner of the coast had come to see it. Elias parked the car along Ocean Avenue, Hazel's small hand clutching his. Agnes walked beside them, her scarf flapping gently in the sea wind. For once, the evening felt almost peaceful. The months of confusion, of anger, of lost years had begun to settle into something softer. They found Marian outside her cafe, hanging paper lanterns along the porch. She turned as they approached, a smile rising slowly. "You made it," she said. Hazel ran to her, eyes wide with wonder. "Mom, the whole town looks like a dream." Marian bent down, smoothing her daughter's hair. "It does, doesn't it? This is what forgiveness looks like, Hazel. It shines when you let it." Her words reached Elias, though she hadn't meant them for him. He stood a few feet away, unsure how to step into this new piece without breaking it. Marian noticed and offered a small nod. "You can help me with the last lantern," she said. He did. Their hands brushed as they tied the ribbon. The brief touch was enough to remind them of everything they hadn't said. When the first lights flickered on, the crowd began to gather. A band played soft carols near the fountain. Children danced in the glow of string bulbs, and the smell of cinnamon cider filled the square. It felt like time itself had slowed to breathe. Elias turned and saw his father standing across the street. Richard Hale, tall, dignified, out of place among the warmth and laughter. He hadn't expected him to come, but of course the man couldn't resist control even now. Richard's eyes found his, cold and unreadable. He started toward them. Agnes whispered, "Don't let him ruin this." But Elias stayed still. He has to face it too. Richard stopped a few feet away, glancing at Hazel first. The child looked up, unafraid. "Hi," she said simply, offering a cookie she'd been holding. "Do you want one, sir?" For a moment, the old man didn't move. Then he took it awkwardly, like someone accepting a peace offering he didn't deserve. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. Marian stepped closer. "You don't have to do this here, Richard." "I do," he said quietly. "Because this is where I broke it." The words surprised them all. The noise of the crowd faded as if the whole town had paused to listen. "I told myself I was protecting my son," Richard continued, looking at Elias. "But truth is, I was protecting myself from shame, from loss, from love I didn't understand." His voice trembled, not from weakness but from age. "And now, the only way I can live with what I did is to let you go free of it." Elias swallowed hard. "It's not that simple." "No," his father said. "But it's a start." For the first time, Elias saw not the ruthless man who had shaped him, but a tired one frightened by the same things he'd once been taught to conquer. The fireworks began just then, small bursts of gold and silver blooming above the ocean. The crowd cheered. Hazel clapped her hands, her laughter cutting through the heavy air. Marian looked at Elias, her face illuminated by the flickering lights. "She's happy," she whispered. "That's all I wanted." He nodded. "Me too." As the fireworks reflected in the waves, Elias realized that the festival wasn't just about lights. It was about people who had learned to stand in the dark together and still find a way forward. The fireworks rippled through the dark, their reflections dancing over the bay. People laughed and sang, their faces glowing in the golden haze. For a few moments, Elias forgot the years of distance, the bitterness, the guilt. He only saw Hazel's joy, her eyes lifted toward the sky, as if the stars themselves were celebrating her family's return. Then, amid the brightness, he saw Marian stumble. She gripped the edge of the cafe's porch, her face pale. Elias reached her before she could fall. "Marian, I'm fine," she murmured, breath-catching. But she wasn't. Her body trembled, her hand pressed to her temple. Agnes appeared at his side. "Get her inside, quick!" They carried her through the door, away from the noise of the crowd. The cafe was dim and warm, filled with the scent of cinnamon and wood smoke. Marion sank into a chair, her eyes unfocused. "It's just dizzy," she whispered. "The lights they reminded me of that night." Elias knelt beside her, his heart pounding. "The accident?" She nodded faintly. "I keep seeing it. The rain, the headlights, your voice." Her hand found his sleeve. "You tried to protect me. You swerved to avoid that truck. But your father, he told the doctors it was my fault. He said you'd never forgive me." The words broke something open inside him. Images flashed, the screech of tires, the shattering glass, her cry in the dark. And then his father's face, cold and certain, saying, "Forget her." "I remember," Elias whispered. "God, Marion, I remember everything." Tears blurred his vision, but he didn't hide them. He held her hand, gripping it as if to anchor himself in the present. Outside, the fireworks were fading, leaving behind the softer glow of lanterns drifting over the sea. Marion looked at him, her eyes filling with tears that weren't from pain but release. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "No," he answered, "but I let him make me believe it was." Hazel appeared in the doorway, clutching her bear. "Is Mom okay?" Marion smiled weakly. "I'm okay, honey." Elias lifted Hazel into his arms. "You see those lights out there?" he asked. "They're not just for Christmas, they're for second chances." Hazel looked at him, her voice small. "Does that mean you and Mom are going to stay together?" He looked at Marion. The answer wasn't in words, but in the quiet nod they shared. When the crowd outside began to sing, Marion leaned back and closed her eyes, exhausted but peaceful. Elias stood by the window, holding Hazel, watching the lanterns drift across the bay. Agnes joined him, her voice low. "You've come a long way, Mr. Hale." He smiled faintly. "I'm just starting, Agnes." Outside, one lantern rose higher than the rest, glowing brighter before fading into the sky. Elias whispered, "For the years we lost." Marion stirred.
"For the years we'll have."
They stood together in the small cafe by the sea, surrounded by light and laughter. The past no longer something to escape, but something they had finally faced and forgiven. As the music drifted through the night, Elias looked down at his daughter and said softly, "Let's go home." And when they stepped outside, the last firework burst above the ocean, a perfect bloom of white and gold, like a promise kept. Morning arrived slow and golden, spilling across the Monterey coast like honey over glass. The festival had ended, but traces of it lingered, the faint scent of pine garlands, bits of ribbon caught in the breeze, the hum of laughter that still lived in the air. Elias woke to the sound of waves outside his window and the quiet rhythm of Hazel's footsteps padding down the hallway. He found her in the kitchen with Agnes, both of them making breakfast. Pancakes again, of course. Hazel's cheeks were dusted with flour, her small hands determined as she shaped the batter into uneven hearts. "Morning, Daddy," she chirped. Elias smiled, the words still strange and sacred to his ears. "Morning, sweetheart. You're up early." "We're making breakfast for Mom," Hazel said proudly. "She's still sleeping." Agnes gave him a knowing look. "She needs rest, poor thing. The doctor said she's just exhausted, but she'll be fine." Elias nodded, grateful. He took the spatula and flipped a pancake, watching it steam on the skillet. "You know," he said softly, "your mom used to make these when we lived here years ago. I remember waking up to the smell of vanilla." Hazel tilted her head. "Did you love her back then too?" He froze for a heartbeat, then smiled. "Yes, I just didn't know how to show it." When Marion finally woke, the table was already set. The light through the kitchen window turned everything golden like a photograph come to life. She paused at the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, watching them laugh together. "Is this what I missed?" she asked gently. Elias looked up. "No," he said. "It's what we missed, but it's not gone." They ate together quietly. No grand speeches, no apologies, just the simple rhythm of passing syrup, refilling coffee, wiping Hazel's sticky fingers. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives like this, soft and domestic. After breakfast, Marion suggested a walk. They wandered down to the beach, the three of them side by side. The tide was low, revealing dark rocks and the shimmer of tide pools. Hazel ran ahead, collecting shells. Elias and Marion walked slowly behind her. "I keep thinking about your father," she said at last. Do you think he meant it? The apology? He watched the waves roll in. Maybe. Maybe it's the only way he knows how to love, through control, through silence. But I don't want that silence anymore. Marian nodded. Neither do I. Answer. They stopped near the water's edge. A small fishing boat drifted in the distance, its reflection trembling on the surface. Marian reached for his hand. We can start over, she said quietly. Not like before. Slower. Kinder. He squeezed her hand. That's all I've ever wanted. Hazel came running toward them, her hair flying in the wind. Look what I found, she said, holding up a small piece of sea glass, pale green and smooth. Marian smiled. It's beautiful. Oh, it used to be sharp, Hazel said. But the ocean made it soft. Elias met Marian's eyes. Out of the mouths of babes, he said softly. They laughed. The kind of laughter that comes not from joy but from relief, the sound of people realizing they've survived. As the sun climbed higher, Marian said, There's one more thing you should know. Elias turned to her, curious. I never stopped writing, she said. Letters to you, to Hazel's future father. I kept them all in a box upstairs at the cafe. They were my way of keeping you alive, even when I thought you were gone. Elias's chest tightened. Can I read them? Not yet, she said. One day, when we've earned the peace to open them. He nodded, understanding. Some wounds healed faster, when left untouched, a little longer. They walked home in silence, hand in hand, the sea whispering beside them like an old friend. That evening, the air carried the quiet hum of the ocean. Inside the Hale home, the fireplace glowed softly, painting the walls in warm amber light. Marian sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, her head resting lightly against Elias's shoulder. Hazel had fallen asleep between them, her bear tucked under her chin, her small chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. For a while, they didn't speak. Peace has a sound of its own, a silence full of meaning, the kind that follows storms, apologies, and years of regret. Outside, the wind stirred the chimes, a steady lullaby that seemed to say, You've come far enough. Rest now. Elias reached for Marian's hand. When I was little, he said, my father used to tell me that love made men weak, that you couldn't build anything lasting if your heart got in the way. Marian smiled faintly. And you believed him. I did, he admitted, for too long. But tonight, I realized he was wrong. Love isn't weakness, it's the thing that survives when everything else breaks. She looked at him, her eyes soft in the firelight. Then maybe you've already built something stronger than he ever did. Before he could answer, the phone on the table buzzed. Agnes, who had been tidying in the next room, picked it up and covered the receiver. It's from your father's assistant, she said quietly. Elias took the call. The voice on the other end was calm, but strained. Mr. Hale, your father asked me to call you. He's not well his heart, sir. He's at the hospital in Carmel. For a long moment, Elias said nothing. The weight of the past and present seemed to meet in the silence. Tell him, he said finally. I'm on my way. He ended the call and turned to Marian. I have to go. She nodded, understanding. Do what you need to do, but don't carry his anger back with you. Agnes touched his arm as he passed. Peace isn't found in words, Mr. Hale. It's found in the way you leave a room. The drive to the hospital was long and quiet. The moon hung low, guiding the way like an old friend. When Elias entered the dim hospital room, Richard Hale was awake, pale but lucid. The monitors beeped steadily, like a metronome marking the last movements of a long life. I didn't think you'd come, Richard said. Elias sat down beside the bed. Neither did I. His father's lips curled in a tired smile. You look like her. The girl from the cafe. I saw her once, years ago. She had your stubbornness. Elias hesitated. You knew she survived. I knew, Richard whispered. And I knew you'd never forgive me if you found out. I thought I could spare you the pain. You spared yourself, Elias said, voice quiet, but steady. Richard's breath trembled. Maybe, but I see now what you built, what I destroyed. His hand moved slightly, frail, searching. That little girl, Hazel, she's yours? Elias nodded. A tear slipped down the old man's face. Then don't repeat my mistakes. Don't let fear make your choices for you. For the first time in his life, Elias took his father's hand. "I already made my choice," he said. "I choose peace." Richard nodded, his eyes closing. "Then maybe I can too." When Elias left the hospital, dawn was beginning to break over the bay. The air was cold but gentle. The world smelled of rain and salt and new beginnings. Back home, Marion was waiting by the porch with a mug of coffee, her hair caught in the wind. "How is he?" she asked. Elias looked toward the horizon. "Tired, but at peace." She touched his arm. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "Getting there." Hazel ran out onto the porch, still in her pajamas. "Daddy, the sun's coming up." He lifted her into his arms, the child's warmth anchoring him to everything that mattered. Together, they watched the first light spill across the water. In that quiet hour, the past no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a road, one they had walked through together and finally left behind. The morning light stretched across the bay like a promise kept. The storm season had passed, leaving the Monterey coast washed clean streets glimmering, windows shining, the air sweet with salt and cedar. Inside the Hale home, the quiet no longer felt heavy. It felt lived in. Elias stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, the steam mingling with the mist rising off the ocean. Behind him, the sound of Hazel's laughter filled the kitchen, joined by Marion's voice humming along to the radio. He closed his eyes, letting that music soak into him. It wasn't grand or perfect, but it was real, the sound of a life rebuilt from silence. Agnes stepped out beside him, a basket of laundry balanced on her hip. "You look like a man who finally found what he was searching for," she said with a smile. "Maybe I stopped searching," Elias replied. "Maybe I just started seeing," she chuckled softly. "About time." They watched Hazel chase the family's new golden retriever down the garden path. The dog, a rescue they'd named Lucky, barked at the seagulls and circled back, tail wagging wildly. "She's changed this house," Agnes said. "All of you have." Elias nodded. "This house used to echo," he said. "Now it breathes." Later that afternoon, Marion joined him by the shore. The sun was warm but low, scattering gold across the waves. She wore one of his sweaters, the sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hair moving gently in the breeze. "I went through my old letters," she said. "The ones I told you about. Most of them were written when I thought you'd never come back. Did you read them?" She smiled. "I did. And for the first time, they didn't hurt." "One." He looked at her, seeing not the girl he once loved, but the woman who had waited, who had built a life from patience. "I'm sorry for every day I didn't know you were out there," he said. Marion reached for his hand. "And I'm grateful for every day that brought you back." They walked along the sand while Hazel ran ahead, her laughter echoing through the wind. Every few feet, she stopped to collect sea glass, tucking each piece carefully into her pocket. "One for each memory," she said. Marion laughed softly. "She's going to run out of pockets before sunset." Elias bent to pick up a shell, smooth and pale as bone. "She reminds me of you," he said. "She reminds me of the best parts of you," Marion replied. As the tide crept closer, Elias hesitated. "Marion, I've been thinking. My father's company, I don't want it anymore. I'll step down. Start something smaller, quieter, something honest." Her eyes softened. "And what about the name?" He looked toward Hazel. "I don't think it matters whose name is on the door. What matters is who we build it for." She smiled, that same gentle curve he remembered from years ago. "You sound like a man who's finally learned to live. Maybe I just learned to listen," he said. The wind carried their words away, leaving only the sound of the waves, old, constant, forgiving. As the sun dipped lower, Marion stopped to watch Hazel holding up a tiny piece of blue glass that caught the last light. "Look, Daddy," she called. "It's like the sky fell into the ocean." Elias laughed, his voice carrying across the shore.
Then keep it safe, sweetheart. The world needs people who remember how to find beauty.
That evening, the sea was calm, its rhythm matching the slow breath of the town. The sun slid lower, turning the waves into ribbons of copper and gold. From the porch, Elias watched the light scatter across Marion's face as she read to Hazel from one of her old letters, the ones she had kept locked away for years. Hazel leaned against her mother's arm, eyes heavy but smiling. "That one's my favorite," she said. "Why?" Marion asked. "Because it sounds happy, like the end of a story when everyone comes home." Elias stood in the doorway, the soft orange glow painting his silhouette. "It's not the end," he said gently. "It's the beginning of a better story." Marion folded the letter, her fingers lingering over the paper. "You always were the dreamer," she said. "Even when you forgot how." He stepped closer. "Then maybe I needed to lose everything to remember what mattered." She smiled, weary but content. "You found your way back. That's enough." Hazel had fallen asleep before the fire burned low. Marion carried her upstairs, the child's head resting on her shoulder. And when she returned, Elias had set 2 cups of tea by the window. The same window where he once spent countless nights staring into the dark, wondering what he had lost. Now the darkness no longer frightened him. It simply made the light more precious. Marion sat beside him. "When I wrote those letters," she said quietly, "I used to imagine you sitting just like this, waiting for the tide to bring something back." He turned to her. "It did." Outside, the lantern from the Winter Lights Festival still hung by the porch, swaying in the breeze. Marion followed his gaze. "I almost took it down this morning." "Don't," he said. "Leave it there. It's a reminder." "Of what?" "That even in the darkest nights," he said softly, "someone's still waiting with the light on." For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the sea whispering its eternal rhythm against the shore. Marion rested her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "I used to be afraid of forgetting," she admitted. "Afraid that time would take everything, faces, voices, love." Elias tightened his grip. "Time doesn't erase love, Marion. It just changes where it lives." They sat there until the moon rose high, turning the ocean silver. The house behind them creaked softly, alive with warmth. Agnes hummed downstairs, washing dishes. The dog sighed at their feet. Every corner of that home carried a piece of peace hard won. Elias looked at Marion and smiled. "You know what Hazel told me this morning? She said the sea glass isn't broken anymore. It just took time to become beautiful." Marion laughed quietly. "Wise little thing. She takes after you," he said. "No," Marion replied, gazing out toward the endless horizon. "She takes after us both the parts we lost and the parts we finally found." The lantern flickered again, its light reflecting in the window, soft, constant, alive. Elias whispered, almost to himself, "Love survives in the quiet things." Marion turned toward him, her eyes glistening. "Then let's live quietly, Elias. Let's live well." He kissed her forehead, the taste of salt and warmth mingling with the air. "We already are." Below the cliffs, the tide rolled in and out unhurried, forgiving, carrying the weight of the past into the deep, leaving only the gentle rhythm of a family rediscovered. And as the lantern swayed in the night breeze, its golden light shimmered across the water like a heartbeat that refused to fade, a memory, not of loss, but of love that had found its way home. As the lantern by the porch swayed in the quiet wind, the Hale home glowed softly against the night. The ocean below whispered its endless rhythm, the same sound that once carried sorrow now singing of peace. Elias had learned that redemption isn't born from grand gestures, but from the small, patient acts of love, the breakfast shared, the hand held, the forgiveness quietly given. In finding Marion and Hazel, he had not only reclaimed a family, but also the man he was meant to be. This story reminds us that love, when nurtured through understanding and kindness, can heal even the deepest wounds. Wealth and pride fade, but compassion endures like the light left burning in a window, waiting to guide someone home. So tonight, wherever you are, take a moment to think about your own light. Maybe it's a call you've been meaning to make, or a word you still owe someone you love. If this story touched your heart, press 1 the comments. And if you have your own story to share, press 0. Because every act of love, no matter how small, has the power to bring someone home again. Like a lamp glowing through the long American night, kindness never asks for attention, it simply shines.